Hello, welcome to this presentation for Tips and Tricks for Advanced Steel 2023. So that was an introduction to Greytec, and now it's time to introduce myself. My name is Alec Giles. I'm a structures consultant at Greytec, and as you can see reading my bio, I originally trained as a mechanical design engineer, and I did about 10 years designing machinery before becoming a CAD manager, starting training and supporting the users in that company. I moved to Greytec in 2010. Since then I've been focused 100% solely on advanced steel, concentrating on how to get the best out of that, and overall I have over 20 years experience in support, training and consultancy. So today's presentation is the 2023 edition of Tips and Tricks for Advanced Steel, and it works on any of the versions of Advanced Steel you're likely to be using, any current version. The first tip we have: think about your Autodesk login and your license information. Autodesk licenses have changed how they operate over the last few years. And these days all licenses are assigned to named users, so not ambiguous or anonymous. They have to be named users, individuals, and they need to be associated with the same email address you use to log into your computer, not just a random email address. It has to be the same one you log into Windows with. They shouldn't be using any addresses such as info at or design at, drawings at. Anything generic is not good enough. Autodesk can detect those and will be upset by them. You must have a proper user name or sensible name for an individual person. You can't have 4 different people sharing one email address and trying to share the one license. Although you can't have different people trying to share one license with an ambiguous address, you can have one person installing Advanced Steel on up to 3 different machines using the same login. So you might be using your desktop at work, or a laptop you move around at work and go to site with, or even a home PC if you have to do extra time at home. But you can't share that for different people. And even if you have it installed and set up on several machines at a time, you can only use it on one of those machines at a given time. So don't try and think this is a get around where you can install it on a desktop and a laptop and have 2 different people using it. If you do that, Autodesk will detect it and they will sue you for it as a breach of license. If you want someone who doesn't have Advanced Steel to be able to see your model or your drawings, use the shared view function in Advanced Steel, which goes to the Autodesk Online Viewer, and that is completely free, and anybody can view your model in any web browser on any device. So if you don't follow these rules properly, if you're trying to cheat and try and have more people than are permitted using the license, you're trying to use the same license on 3 people, or you have it installed on too many machines, Autodesk can audit your software usage. They can monitor the licenses in the background without you necessarily knowing about it. At any time they know how many licenses you're using and what you're using them on. And if they detect you're going beyond your license agreement, they can prosecute or sue you, or they can force you to pay the difference from what you're using and what you've actually already got. So you will have to pay the difference, and you'll be referred to penalties and back paying for all the licenses and all the time you've been using them when you shouldn't have been. So don't fall foul of an audit from Autodesk. They can audit you at any time. Make sure you're using the licenses safely, but don't panic about it. This isn't anything to get all upset about and panic around. It's not complicated, really, not too bad. If you're not sure about anything, speak to Greytech and we'll help you make sure you are license compliant. It's quite straightforward, really, when you get the idea, but it is important to be license compliant. We have had customers doing all of these things above, and they have been audited by Autodesk and forced to pay large charges, many thousands of pounds in back charges and license fees. Okay, the next tip we're going to look at is updating special parts. So we're going to jump around. There's tips and tricks. There's going to be all sorts of random things. So we're going to look at updating special parts. And the first thing you want to do, if you want to change a special part in your model, you've got a model, you've used a special part, maybe you've sort of railing fitting or something like that, and you need to change it for a different one. First thing to do is to use a search filter to select all the occurrences of the existing special part that you want to replace. So you get all of them selected at once. Then you can, in the properties of that part, you can browse to your new special part file. But just browsing to it doesn't actually replace the special part in all the locations in your model. It may or may not replace the first one. It certainly won't replace the others. You need to do an extra step. You must go to the drop down with the special part name and select the correct special part name again in that drop down. That is the point it will replace all the existing special parts. So you have to go down to that last click there in that block name drop down. So let's just demonstrate that. So here we have a model you might be familiar with, and you've got these Q-rail fittings all over the place, and it's called Q-rail glass clamp. But we're going to change that curved one for this square fronted one. So we're just going to close that file, and we need to replace this one here. So what we're going to do, we're just going to grab a property. So we're going to use the free remark. We're just going to grab whatever that says in free remark, copy that, and then we're going to use the search filter, and we're going to search for all those parts. So we're going to search for, clear everything out of there. We're going to go to special part, and we want to search for special parts where the free remark equals whatever we just copied. Okay, and that's identified them all. I'm all marked in green, and we use the select marked objects to select them all, and then we go into properties. Now we're in the special part properties. We can browse, and we go and find the new or the replacement model on disk wherever we've chosen to store that. So here's our new one with the square version. But nothing's changed. If you have a look at the parts, they're still showing the curved front. So just browsing to the new one doesn't replace all the parts. You have to go to this drop down, you have to pick the new part from the list there, and now all of them have changed to that new square front. So it's quite straightforward when you do it, but you must remember to do it in the right sequences, otherwise it doesn't change them all. So there we go. We've replaced many occurrences, 12 occurrences of that special part in one move. Next tip, special characters. Now this catches people out from time to time. You must not use special characters. Special characters are anything other than letters, numbers, plus, minus, or underscore. The special characters, I'm talking about things like the dollar sign or the apostrophe or the and, ampersand sign, anything like those. They can all have special meanings in computer programming. So if you use them in other places, when the computer program tries to process that value, it doesn't read what you think it reads. It means something special to the computer, and it causes all sorts of problems and confusion and trips up the code and can cause errors in your functionality. So the only safe kind of characters to use or punctuation to use are the plus sign, the minus sign, or the underscore. I would strongly recommend avoiding any other type of character or punctuation. They could all cause potential problems. So you shouldn't use special characters. When we're saying don't use special characters, what we're talking about? We're talking about don't use them in folder names. So there I've got Town Hall, comma, Annex B. That comma could cause problems. File names, the same. Block names, definitely don't use weird characters in the block names. In the project settings, this is an unusual one. So when you're setting your project settings for your model to fill in the type of blocks and things, try to avoid special characters. And we've seen things where people have put apostrophes in, like Lang O'Rourke has an apostrophe in it, and that has tripped up functionality, broken exports, various things. Just suddenly weird things start happening, and you think, what on earth's wrong? and eventually it's all down to just having that apostrophe there. Take out the apostrophe, everything works fine again. So avoid using any special characters anywhere in your system. Now we can move on. The next one is rollover tooltips and quick properties. What do we mean? Well, rollover tooltips. To see the properties of an advanced steel object, you normally have to double click on it to go up to advanced properties, and then you can read all those different properties. But if you're careful, you can set the system up so you can show selected properties when you just hover over an item. So you can see in the images I'm hovering over a beam on the left, and I've got things like the beam name, so I can see what size it is, I can see the part numbers, I can hover over that plate and see the plate dimensions and the part numbers, or the grating, or whatever, different properties for different objects, just by hovering over them. And that's obviously a very useful thing to do. You can find parts, you can read the properties without having to actually double click to go into the advanced properties. But you need to set this up carefully within the system. Most advanced steel properties are available on that tooltip, but obviously you don't want that panel to be enormous with listing 35 different properties. Try and keep it just down to a handful of the most important properties that you might be interested in. And you can then define different properties for different objects. So obviously with a bolt it might be things like diameter and coating or material, whereas with a plate it's going to be length and width and the part numbers. Bolts don't really have part numbers. Gratings, you want grating class. So different properties for different types of object. That's rollover tooltips, but they can also apply the same to quick properties. What do we mean by quick properties? Well, that's a slightly different version where instead of hovering over the part to bring up the properties, you have to actually click on the part and select it. And the properties only appear in this little floating window when you actually select the part. But the properties will stay there then, even as you move around the mouse and so on. They'll stay on the screen until you click the little X to get rid of them. So it might be more convenient. It doesn't come up all the time, only when you ask for it. And you can also select multiple objects. See in the right hand image I've got 3 beams selected, so it's telling me the size of all 3 beams. Obviously the part numbers vary. And you can turn this function on and off, which is quite a nice thing. So instead of it coming up all the time when you don't really want it, you can only have it when you want it. You can turn it on. When you don't need it the rest of the time, you can turn it off with a simple toggle on the status line. So let's see these things in action.
In this model, or if I hover over the beams, you'll see that I get a tooltip pop up. And that tooltip's telling me information like not only the layer, but the beam size, the model roll, part numbers, lot and phase, and so on. If I go in closer and I hover over a plate, I get similar information for the plate, length, width, and thickness. I can hover over a bolt, and I get some information for bolts. These tooltips can be very helpful. Save you having to go into the properties to find, is this beam 1 or is that beam 1? I can have a quick look. That's beam 11. Is that the same? No, that's beam 10, so I know which one I'm looking for. These can be very helpful, as I say. So if you want to set this up, you can do so as follows. First of all, type in the command CUI. There you go, CUI. Nothing else, just CUI. And it comes up with the fancy dialog box where you can edit and mess about with all your menus and everything. Be careful in here because your code could wreak havoc. Here we go, on the left hand side you'll find an area called rollover tooltips. You can select that and it'll come up with tables on the right hand side. To begin with, in this table you won't have any advanced steel object showing. You need to click on this little icon at the top, edit object type list. And when you do that, you'll get this other box up. And in here you can search for or select any of the AST objects. So if its object name starts AST, it's an advanced steel object. And you would have some properties you could display for that object. If it says ASTX, then it is an advanced steel object, but there's no properties you could display in a rollover tooltip or anything. So there's no point in turning any of those on. So you can see there's quite a few here, including cameras, unfortunately, and other ones that you can't throw any properties for. But I've turned on all the other AST objects. You see even bolt patterns, there's different types of patterns. You've got bolt 2 points, circular, corner, mid, and so on. Let's turn on all the ones you're interested in. And then for each one of those you can go to anchor, and you can select, I want to have the diameter, the assembly, and the standard showing. Don't really need the layer, so I can maybe turn that off. If it's something like a beam or a plate, you go to plate. You start off at the top of this list, you see the general there, AutoCAD properties like color and layer. And then you come down, you've got user attributes, and eventually you get to the advanced steel once you've got name, model role, lot of phase, part numbers, and so on. All of the advanced steel properties are available. Like I say, same for beam. You can come down here, you've got all the fabrication data, the part numbers, the name, and so on. So you tick the properties you're interested in seeing, then click apply, then say OK. And from now on, that's stored on your PC that you can see those properties. So if I hover over a beam, I get the properties of a beam. I'll go and find an anchor and hover over the anchor. I get some properties for the anchor. I get some properties for the concrete, or whatever. Very helpful. The same thing to go with that is quick properties. The thing with rollover tooltips, if they're turned on, then every time you move around, it'll be looking for the properties to display. So even if you're moving quickly, sometimes you might find it gets a little jerky because it's trying to, oh, what's the property of that? What's the property of that beam? What's the property of that beam? What's the property of that plate? What about that beam? And it's constantly looking up with these properties before you can move your mouse. So it gets quite jerky sometimes. You can see I'm working fine here. It's not jerky for me here, but can do sometimes. So as an alternative to pop-up or rollover tooltips, you could turn those off. You can turn them on and off in the general AutoCAD options. Just right-click in Fresh Air and go to Options. And on the display, you've got Show Rollover Tooltips. So I could turn those off. Okay. And I could set up exactly the same thing using the CUI. We've got another area here called Quick Properties. It's basically exactly the same to set up as tooltips. There's the tooltips, there's the Quick Properties, and again I can pick the object I want, tell it what I want to see, and click Apply and OK. And the benefit of the tooltips is you can turn those on and off. They only come up when you want them. In fact, down at the very bottom on the status line you have a toggle, Quick Properties on or off, and you can turn that toggle on or off using the 3 lines at the end. So I've turned my toggle on, so that toggle is showing, and currently my Quick Properties off. So if I select a beam, nothing happens. But if I turn Quick Properties on, now it's in the mode where it's going to start looking for information. It doesn't look for any information I just hover over. I have to actually click on the beam, and bang, there pops up a box with the selected information in there. I can close that, and I can try a plate. There you go, there's the information I've asked for. Or I could try an anchor, or I could try concrete, or I could try whatever I wanted. Special part. And it tells me all the information it can find for me. But once I've finished finding that information, I can turn the toggle at the bottom off again, and now clicking on objects doesn't bring up that box. So with the tooltips, you get the same information either way as rollover tooltips or with Quick Properties. But with Quick Properties, you can turn them on and off easily, so you only get them when you want them, rather than the system always looking for them, if it gets a little bit jerky when you're doing rollover tooltips. The last caveat I'll give you to any of that, when you first fire up Advanced Steel, the first item you have to hover over is a beam. So after I fired it up, open a model, I'd immediately go to a beam and hover, so I get the rollover tooltip pop up. Otherwise, if I hover over a plate or a special part, the first thing I do, it breaks the rollover tooltips, and none of them will work properly for the rest of that session. You have to close and restart Advanced Steel. So I'll turn on my tooltips again. Okay, now I'll make sure I hover over beams, the first thing I do. Now I'm fine, I can hover over plates or whatever, and that'll work. But if I hovered over something else first, you wouldn't get all the properties come up at all. That's rollover tooltips and Quick Properties.
So that's a very helpful tool to quickly interrogate your model and find what you're looking for. Next tool, another underused tool or little known tool, is really useful, is Copy with Adjustment. So Copy with Adjustment. Copying can sometimes be a bit of a pain when you need to copy something, but the destination is at a different angle, different rotation, or whatever it might be. You'd have to copy, you'd have to rotate, you'd have to mess about a lot. But this is where you can use Copy with Adjustment to get the same situation at the start and the end. So you can find it on the Tools palette. You can see it outlined in the window there in the picture. The only thing you have to remember with this is that this tool copies from the start of a beam to the start of the new beam. So it's important to know the start and the end of a beam. Usually doesn't matter too much in Advanced Steel, the start and end points, which way around they were, but this tool, it will matter. So for example, you've got a picture there, you've got the reference element, the flat bar at the bottom. So they're copying the holes, and they're going to be 130 from the start end of the beam. So when you pick the destination beam, the target element, again, if the start was at the other end at the top, then the holes would have been placed 130 from the top. So it's important to know which end is the start. It will make a difference on some of your copies. Let's see that. So we've got the model here, quite familiar with it again, and you've got panels. We're going to use copy with adjustment. We're going to go in here and look at these panels. We've got the lower panel is the same on the top rail, but it's going to be rotated. So we're going to start copy with adjustment. I'm going to come in here and going to copy the panel. We're going to select those glass clamps, so just little windows to do that. So we're going to copy those objects, and instead of choosing a start point, you choose a reference element. So they relate to this post, and then you go to a target element. So we want them to new relating to that post, and you can see it's put them in immediately, and it's done all the job for you. So copy them, relocated them, put them same offsets on the new post. Now we're just going to make that plate a bit smaller, so we're just going to stretch it to a better location, make it line up with that, and then move, allow for the gap on the edge, move that in. Okay, and now we need the top clamps. So once again, I'm going to do copy with adjustment. I'm going to choose those top clamps from this post. So our reference element is the top post here, and the target element is the top post on the new rail. And once again, it's copied the clamps around to the same relative position, but rotated them and so on, so they match that new post. And we've got the whole panel created very easily. So the copy with adjustment, very good at rotating and realigning as it moves up and down. Very helpful tool. And then we come to match properties. So again, maybe a tool that people don't appreciate you can use in Advanced Steel. Match properties is the ordinary AutoCAD match properties command. You may be familiar with it from AutoCAD, but you can use it for Advanced Steel objects as well. And it will match all the possible Advanced Steel properties as well as the AutoCAD properties. So things like section class and size, the material, the coating, the positioning, the model roll, all these critical Advanced Steel properties, lot and phase, behavior, and all your numbering prefixes. So all the properties that are really important to you in Advanced Steel, if you can't remember them or you just want to match another beam, you can copy them all using this match properties. So after you select your example, you can go to settings and you can choose which ones of those properties you're going to match. You see there you got a picture of the dialog box, the typical beam properties, and you can set which of those properties you want to match with those tick boxes. So I didn't want to match lot and phase, but everything else about this beam was the same. I could untick lot and phase, and then it would copy all the rest of the properties without copying lot and phase. So again, let's see that in action.
Sometimes when you're modelling in Advanced Steel, you want to add more members that are matching existing members in the model. But it may be some time since you put those existing members in there. For example, in this model I have some cold rolled side rails here, and I want to add some vertical members for window opening in the same area. Now I could look up, double click on the rail to see what size it is, but another alternative is to simply draw two beams of any old size, don't care about any properties there, let's move them to the right places. Now, I've got the members, obviously the wrong sizes, but instead of having to look up the size, I could go to Tools, Match Properties. This is the ordinary AutoCAD Match Properties command, but it's been enhanced with the Advanced Steel. So when I pick on an example first, I'll pick on one side rail. I see I'll get the little paintbrush next to the cursor now, so that means anything I click on now will change to match the example. So I can click on these two beams, and you see they change. They've not only changed the layer, so they've gone to light blue, they've also changed the section size to match, they've changed the positioning to bottom middle to match, they've changed the model roll and everything. So right click and enter to finish that. So if I double click on this beam, I can see it's Steadman's C17015. Model roll, cold rolled side rail, positioning, bottom middle. I'll pick these two beams now. You can see there, C17015, bottom middle, cold rolled side rail. So all the advanced steel properties can be matched. Now in that case, obviously we'd need to move them out or flip them to top middle. But all the other properties are done for me. I've got to remember which layer something was on if you're using your own layer scheme. I haven't got to remember what section size it was or what model roll did I give it. I just know it matches now. The same can apply to any other type of object. So maybe I want to add some more gratings to this outside platform to match the inside. So I'll put my UCS on the corner of the grating, corner of the platform. I draw a couple of gratings. I can draw any old size I like. I don't need to be picky. One there. And one there. Now, all I need to do is go match properties. So that's tools, match properties. That's the example. And I want to change that one and that one. Enter. And now I select all three, go into the properties. You see they've all got the same class and name. Now when you're doing the match properties, when you've picked your example, you can right click before you pick any ones to change. You can right click in FreshAir and go to settings. You've got the dialog box here, typical advanced steel properties box, but you can see it's got a tick next to all the different properties it could potentially match. So you don't have to match every property. You could say, well, I want to do everything except the model roll. I want to match the beam size, but I don't want to match the lot and phase. So you can untick that one and it will match all the beam sizes and model rolls, but not the lot and phase. So you can choose what it matches across the different elements. And there's the basic AutoCAD properties you can choose from as well. So handy little tool to make things match up.
Next up, we've got transfer properties for joints. So this is an interesting tool. Transfer properties. If you have similar joints in your model and you want to change all of them in the same way, but they're not a joint group, joint groups need to be used with a little bit of caution, then instead of using a joint group, you can use transfer properties to make all the joints match. It's a bit like match properties for joints. So, for example, you might be changing the bolt centers on the first joint. You want all your end plates to have new bolt centers, but you want to change them all, but what's the easy way? Well, you edit the first joint as required, so you can change the bolt centers, change the plate size, do whatever you need to do to that first copy of the joint. Then you go to the extended modeling ribbon and the joint utilities group and choose transfer properties shown there in the image. You select one part of each joint, it doesn't matter which part, but you select one item from each joint you want to change, and then you accept, and then you select any part of the example joint, the one that you've already configured correctly, and accept, and all the joints will change to match that example. So it's a great way to make all your joints match. If you have to change lots of joints, instead of having to go into each properties one at a time. Let's see that going.
Sometimes when you're modeling an advanced steel, you need to make a change to a joint, which will apply equally to many similar joints. For example, the haunch joints on this model, you can see they're not part of a group, or they're quite different. This one's got a much longer haunch, that one's got Morris stiffeners in there. So they're different joints, all independent for each other, but I want to make a change that applies to all of them. In fact, I'd like them all to match. So what I can do, I could change just the first joint. So if I go into ordinary joint properties there, and let's make some changes we can see. So let's make the haunch bigger, and maybe put on an additional rafter. Like so. So that's maybe turn off the stiffeners so we can see it's definitely clearly different. So there we go, got quite a different joint there now. Done the first one, now I want all the others to match the same as that now. So what I can do, I can go to the extended modeling ribbon, and I can use the transfer properties command under joint utilities here. So especially for joints, transfer properties. and I pick any member belonging to the joints I want to change. They all have to be eaves, haunch to flange. Can't suddenly change an end plate or an eaves, haunch to web to match a flange one. So they all have to be eaves, haunch to flange. I can select all the ones I want to change. Then I right click to accept. And then I pick the example joint that's they're all going to match. And there you go. They've all changed. All got the same size haunch, all got the extra bit on the outside now. Just like that.
So how quick and easy is that? Like we say, the only caveat is they have to all be the same type of joint. All have to be single-sided end plate, or they all have to be base plate or eaves, haunch to flange. As long as they're the same type of joint, you can copy the properties from one joint to lots of others using that transfer properties tool. Very helpful when editing your models. So that's a selection of tips and tricks for this batch, and I hope you found those useful and interesting, and keep looking out for our other webinars. Thank you very much for your attention.